Good evening, everyone. So as you've heard, I'm from Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory. Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory is situated near the town of Sandwich. And if you've done any geography homework before tonight, Sandwich is situated way across on the far east coast of Kent. And I live fairly nearby in a village called Kingstown, which is situated near a town called Warner. And my drive into the observatory takes me between 15 and 20 minutes whenever I go down there. It depends on the time of day. Tomorrow morning I'm ringing. I'm one of the ringers at the observatory. I hold an S license, which is the highest ringing license, and I'm one of the senior ringers, and I'm a trainer at the observatory. And I shall be leaving home here at something like 5:45 tomorrow morning, and it will take me 15 minutes to get to the observatory. So there are not many bird observatories around the country, and there are certainly not too many bird observatories like our own, whereby, as well as running a bird observatory, and I'll tell you how that works in a moment, we also have a field study centre, and we monitor not just birds at the bird observatory, but other taxa as well, including botany. We do the odonata and the moths and butterflies, mammals, absolutely everything in really quite a large area. So my first photograph here shows you Sandwich Bay. This is our rather nice beach. It's very long. It's a mile long from just around the corner from Deal right the way through to the end here, which is at the end of Sandwich Bay. And in the distance across here is a place called the Isle of Thanet. And at the very end of the Isle of Thanet here is a town called Ramsgate. Once Sandwich Bay reaches the Thanet coastline, it becomes Pegwell Bay, which is actually a national nature reserve, and it's a Ramsar site. The whole area is specially designated, particularly for wetland species. Although when we monitor how species are doing, how they're declining in our area, you wouldn't think it has any protection at all. So the Sandwich Tern, top left of the photograph, gets its name quite simply from Sandwich and Sandwich Bay. It got its English name, its first scientific name, in the 18th century, and unfortunately, when it was at that time, Sandwich Terns were breeding at a very remote part of the beach at the end of the area you can see there. But these days there's too much disturbance, and unfortunately Sandwich Terns no longer breed with us there. However, we do see them every year as passage migrants. Of course, lots of people like sandy beaches, and this is a mix of sand and shingle at this end, but it becomes more sandy as you walk up. This is ideal breeding habitat for ringed plover, the other bird that you can see at in the front of the picture here. And they've always bred all the way around as far as Thanet. These days, if one or two pairs manage to breed every year, we're lucky. So there is a pressure on this sort of coastline, unfortunately. So on the right-hand side here, you've got a map, and the map shows all the bird observatories around the British coastline. We're one of 19 now. I think there's one to add. That's on the island of Alderney here in the Channel Islands. And the main job or one of the major jobs of a bird observatory is to monitor the movements of birds. And as you'll see, we're all situated in coastal sites. A good number of us up the North Sea. The rest almost are in the Irish Sea and downwards. And these are both really good and busy flyways for migrant bird species, both arriving in Britain and Europe to breed in the summer, and for winter birds coming down from the Arctic to breed, and vice versa. So we're on a great flyway, but also these days we monitor birds so that it's possible to gather sufficient data to look at their breeding populations and how well they fare, how long they live for, how birds are breeding and so on, which is probably more important these days than just watching birds migrating. So we've been around since the 1950s when the observatory started as a simple ringing station. So your third bird species here is in the hand. I mentioned that I'm a ringer, and ringing does produce a huge amount of data, really good, accurate stuff, not just about the presence of a bird, where it may have been in the past, but it also, when we're ringing, we look at birds as individuals, we weigh them, we look at, particularly during the migration season, how much fat the birds are carrying, which is fuel for their journeys, and so on. So we're looking at the health of birds as well. So there we are. I described where we were. The map here of Kent has been taken from the Kent Breeding Bird Atlas, which also has a sandwich tern on the front cover, as you can see down on the right-hand side. And some of you may know Kent well, some of you may not know Kent at all, but you will recognise some of the place names. And if I take you around the coastline here from Dungeness in the south up through Folkestone, Dover, and Deal, I live just to the south of Deal, and then just outside of the town of Sandwich is Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory, and then beyond is the Isle of Thanet with Ramsgate and Margate, Herne Bay and Whitstable along the south coast, and so on. So we couldn't be any further away from you in Kent than we are, and we cover birds in quite a big area around the observatory. So I've got a couple of aerial photographs here. This is quite an old one from 2015, but it gives you a pretty good idea of how things look within the end of the map that I've just shown you. So we're now looking north this way up into the top left-hand corner. So we're on a swivel as far as orientation of the map is concerned. And Pegwell Bay is marked off here, the Isle of Thanet. As we looked up Sandwich Bay Beach, it was along here, and I pointed out Ramsgate in the distance, Margate and Westgate and Broadstairs are over in this sort of direction here. So this actually shows you part of our recording area. An observatory will have a designated recording area, and we do not take records outside of that area. So our designated area takes us all the way around into Pegwell Bay up until this point here. And it's coastline only around Pegwell Bay here, or just inland. And then when we come round to the mouth of the River Stour here, one of the larger rivers in Kent, then we look after this area here that takes us around the Big Fizers site here, which has always been famous in Sandwich, through some farmland here and down to the sea. This is the private Sandwich Bay estate. I'll tell you about that in a moment. We are in a gated private area, and also we have 3 golf courses situated in our recording area. The golf course that takes up this area here is the Royal St George's, which many of you will have heard of. That hosts the British Open about every 7 years. Prince's Golf Course is another famous one situated further on. And then down behind us and off the map down here is another one called the Royal Cinque Ports. The golf courses make quite a major effect to our recording, sometimes good, but mostly good, but sometimes rather bad. So we're situated, you can just see our building here. The next aerial view shows things from a different angle, and here north is up, this way the other direction up here, and this is a much clearer photograph taken again some time ago. The old power station here is no longer in existence. That used to be a famous landmark, but we're not going to worry too much about that. This is the Sandwich Bay private estate here. The buildings around Royal St George's are here, and the Royal St George's golf course runs up to this point here, and that's Prince's beyond. So this whole area here is actually covered by our recording area. And here's the observatory, sorry. And this time we're looking out to the south and the west here, where our recording area continues. We're the largest landowner now on the Sandwich Bay estate. We have some nature reserves which we manage, and most of them now we have purchased. The last one takes in much of this area here, on which a very rare damselfly was found about 5 years ago, and we now have that field, and we have dragonfly and damselfly ponds in here. We also own this area here, and what you can see in the lower half is our scrape, an integral part of our area. It's a wetland area, and at that time when we took the photograph, there was just one hide here. It's always been an absolute magnet for wetland bird species. So when we had a chance to buy this area of land, we bought this piece as well, and we've now extended our scrape right the way through over both areas, more than doubling it in size, and we now have 2 hides. We own this area of lovely dune grassland here. Dune grassland is a very rare habitat in the British Isles. You can find sand dunes up the east coast, and particularly northern England through Northumberland and up into Scotland, where there are some golf courses there as well, but not here in the south and southeast. There are sand dunes along just between the beach and the golf courses all the way along here. But this is really a terrific area of grassland, particularly good for invertebrates, for insects, and for quite rare plant species, particularly a lot of orchids. So that's how we look from the air. The land that we purchased, here's the observatory here, we purchased from the farm owners who actually, there's the area of the farm, they've always owned all this area around here. So more on dates in a moment, but just a little bit more about what we do. If you're all birders, you all go out watching birds, you like to watch migrant birds, but how often have you actually had the opportunity to watch migration taking place? Well, at the observatory, we employ 2 wardens, a warden, a senior warden, and an assistant. And their job is to do the monitoring, to look after the monitoring, but with the help of volunteers who are members of the observatory. We now have 750 members of the observatory, which with their subscription every year gives us some good income to run the field centre and to pay our wardens, and also to purchase land. So watching birds while they're migrating is quite an unusual thing to do. We're all aware that suddenly chiffchaffs or willow warblers or wheatears or redstarts have arrived in the spring, but we don't see them flying. And the reason is that the majority of migrants, certainly passerine migrants, migrate at night. So that's not easy to follow. And there aren't that many birds that migrate during the daytime. Certainly raptors do, and some of the larger birds like storks, but so too do the hirundines. So here we are. I'm going to give you examples like this all the way through, just to give you an idea of numbers, and that there are times, if you're lucky and you choose your day right, you can see a lot of birds. So here we are. You've already read the script on the top there. On the 20th of September 2017, 110,000 house martins and 47,000 swallows moved through Sandwich Bay. Well, I was present that day. A lot of us were out counting the birds, or estimating the numbers of birds, and these are the figures that we eventually came up with for the day. And these are house martins that we're looking at here. House martins, although there are declining species in the UK these days, can move through Sandwich Bay, as you see there, in quite big numbers, but it's always swallows that are the heaviest. It's all a matter of weather conditions and whether things are right for birds to move, and it really does depend on whether it's spring or autumn, and really which birds are involved and where they're coming from and going to, as to which are the best weather days. So during October and into November, we probably ring more birds on a day than at any other time during the year, although September can be very busy. And the really big numbers are often coming in October. And birds like both goldcrest on the right and firecrest on the left move across the North Sea and the Channel in huge numbers to spend the winter here in the UK. That's unbelievable for little birds that weigh no more than 5 grams. Often by the time they've flown across the North Sea from around the Baltic countries, which is where most of them come from, they will have burned up a lot of fat. And some of them will just be weighing 4.3, 4.2 grams, which is virtually nothing. And that's still happening. I was ringing on Saturday, and we're still catching firecrests and goldcrests coming across the channel, so that's continuing. But sometimes we can have very big days, and on a particularly calm day, this again is in 2015, October the 2nd, a total of 443 birds were ringed. We had a lot of ringers in that day. That takes a lot of effort to do that and to take all the details. But the amazing thing was that of that 443 birds, 351 were goldcrests. That was a huge movement of goldcrests. We haven't seen those numbers since, although over a period of time the birds will actually be arriving. We're also obviously doing all this. We're also monitoring changes in bird behaviour, and another day in September 2015, same year, that was a pretty good year for ringing for us, we ringed an incredible 1,242 siskins. Well, that's incredible, considering that in the last 62 years, over the whole of that 62 years, we'd only caught and ringed 313. Since then, since 2015, siskins have been regular and fairly numerous visitors moving through southeast England. Now, a lot of those birds will actually be moving out of the UK, having bred here, and moving across to the continent, particularly going sort of south and southeastwards. And at the same time, we've been catching quite a lot of redpolls as well. Now, all sorts of myths are squashed when you come and watch birds being ringed, and you look at the detail of bird ringing, because when you've got a bird in the hand with a ring on it, the ring will show a particular number, and that's a very distinctive number that is only listed against that one individual bird. It will say where the bird came from, and it will give you a very brief address as to where to send the details to if you were to find that bird somewhere, find it dead somewhere. So I think most of you would say, if I asked you, are blue tits migrants? It's pretty likely that you would say no, and that most of you may think possibly that the same blue tits will be in your garden day after day, week after week, month after month. That's not likely to be the case, especially now when we're starting to pick up blue tits migrating to the UK from Europe, and some of our ringed blue tits are now making their way across to Europe in the autumn and early winter. So here we are. This was an amazing day when this blue tit, the very blue tit that you're looking at there, looking very colourful, by the way, in March, bigger and generally more colourful than our British blue tits. This bird had come from Lithuania. Now that's a fair way, and since that date, we've had more and more records. Two photographs taken in the same place, well, three photographs, because there's a ring in the middle of the picture here. I'm talking about ringing first because this is my speciality at the observatory, although I do a lot of lecturing there as well. And I'm on a couple of committees. But anyway, at the same location in my garden, on an orange pyracanthus, two blackbirds here. The one on the right with its bright yellow bill and yellow eye ring is a British male blackbird. The one on the left with its black bill and its dull plumage is most likely to be a blackbird that has come here in the autumn and early winter from somewhere on the continent. Now, at this time of the year, if you're seeing blackbirds around in your garden or the park or the area where you watch your birds, you will definitely be seeing male blackbirds with black bills. If you do so, then they will be birds that have migrated here from the continent. Over the last 2 months, every time we're ringing, we're catching blackbirds coming in from the continent, big numbers of them, and that's a good way of telling the difference between them. The ring in the foreground here, you've probably guessed it, with DEN on the bottom, is a blackbird that's travelled here only a couple of weeks ago from Denmark. So they're coming from Denmark. We're currently seeing robins and starlings from Moscow, for instance. Big distances covered by these wintering birds. No two birds are alike in their migration routes. It's very rare that there won't be something different about one or other of them. And the map here, published in a really nice book that's available from the BTO called A Time to Fly, and written by a great Kentish ornithologist, Jim Flegg. There are some really good maps. What this map shows regarding redwings is that some of the first redwings we can see in the UK, but mostly in the west of the country and also in Ireland, are birds that have been breeding in Iceland. These birds move through fairly quickly. The redwings that we're likely to see and are coming in now and have been for several weeks and are likely to be in our gardens, feeding out in the fields and hedgerows, are redwings that come from Scandinavia, but particularly from Russia and Siberia. There is a difference in appearance between the two different birds, and we don't see that many of the Icelandic race. We catch most of our birds using mist nets, but we have other ways of catching birds as well. I'm going to show you a Heligoland trap in a moment. We also use whoosh nets and a whole range of things. So when we put mist nets up, we can catch anything that's flying around. And obviously we will catch sparrowhawks. This is a young sparrowhawk. It was a big one, so it was a female. Young bird because of the pale edging to the feathers on the mantle here. An adult would not have the pale edging on those feathers. And the sparrowhawks, of course, come in to catch other birds. But again, incredibly, in the autumn, we start to see more sparrowhawks. And we catch sparrowhawks and kestrels as well that have been breeding in Europe. And they're moving to the warmer side of Europe to us, where we're warmed up by the Gulf Stream, to spend the winter, possibly coming into your garden to chase your blue tits and lesser redpolls and goldfinches and so on. So just a couple of more slides about ringing. That's not the whole reason for a bird observatory, but this is the area that I particularly work in, as I've said. So we put aluminium rings on birds. We fit them to their legs. We have different size rings for different groups of birds. Both of the birds here are chiffchaffs, and chiffchaffs take our smallest ring size, along with birds like willow warblers and wood warblers, goldcrests and firecrests, long-tailed tits, small birds like that. And you'll notice that the pliers have different size holes in them to match those rings, making it impossible to squeeze the ring flat against the bird's leg and damage it. To become a qualified ringer that is able to ring not independently, but under a trainer like myself, but that can ring on their own, say in a small area with 1 or 2 nets. You can get a C license, but that C license will take 2, probably even 3 years to obtain. So we're really all very highly trained to do this, particularly to extract birds from nets. Here's a chiffchaff that is in our mist net here. It looks terribly tangled, but the object is not to tangle the bird up in the net. Along each net, and we use 60-foot long nets, a series of strings like this one here. They run through the net like this, and it means that when a bird hits the net, this one would have hit above the next string up, and there's then a pocket of net that hangs down, and that bird is sitting on the other side of the net from where I'm looking, but in a pocket of netting. So somebody can put their hand down in here, and that bird will be removed within a few seconds. So just a little bit more about bird ringing. The chiffchaff I showed at Sandwich Bay, the chiffchaff I showed you just now, is one of the most numerous birds that we ring every year, along with these 2 species. Blackcaps are very numerous with us, moving through particularly in the autumn, and lesser redpolls are becoming much more numerous than they used to be, as migrant birds moving almost certainly out of the UK during the autumn or early winter. And from all 3 of these, we have a very really an unusually high instance of getting ring recoveries back on those birds. Other ringers further down on the continent or in the continent are picking up our birds and vice versa. So that is extremely high. And just very quickly, this is a Heligoland trap. You may have come across these if you visited the Dungeness Bird Observatory or the Dungeness area. You'll have seen their Heligoland trap, which is situated in the moat around the bird observatory there. Other observatories have them. And what this is, it's like an enormous cage that narrows down from the biggest end, or the widest end where we're standing, where the birds go in, to the furthest end, which narrows down and where we take the birds out. So this means that when birds are in there, they're not confined. They can move in and out. And just to show that this works really well, in the summer, we have several species of birds actually breeding within our Heligoland trap. This includes reed. This is a wetland area here, hence the bulbul. We have reed warblers nesting in there. We have wrens. We have dunnocks nesting in there, and others every year. So the idea is that we walk in the trap at this end. If any birds are still within the trap, we gently push them down towards the other end from which the birds are easily and safely extracted. I'm just going to illustrate 3 bird species that I've taken from the trap here, which are some of the more interesting birds. Last winter, whilst 2 of us were ringing, snipe and woodcock were quite simply falling out of the sky as they were coming in on a very cold November morning. And we managed to get one of the snipe in the Heligoland trap there. That was it. That's probably the most exciting bird I've taken out. That's a long-eared owl. We had 2 of them in on that day. And the latest bird, and this happened on Saturday, a water rail. Water rails spend quite a bit of time in that in the wetland area that I've just shown you. We also colour ring birds, even with small passerines like house sparrows. Forget that's not a great photograph for house sparrow, but you can read the ring there, and it makes these rings easy to read. So that means that each time somebody in the observatory reads the ring from that bird, we've got that bird processed once again, and we're following its lifespan, and also if it was a young bird, how well it survived, and so on. So through ringing birds, we've over the years learned a huge amount about them, and this includes the barn swallow that breeds in the UK here. We now know that all of our barn swallows spend the winter not just in Africa, but in South Africa, and not just in South Africa, but in Cape Province and KwaZulu-Natal. They're very specific to the areas in which they go. And we now know through not just ringing cuckoos, because we didn't have much feedback on cuckoo rings for a long time. Both of these photographs are of juvenile cuckoos until 2011, when a lot of you will probably know that the BTO set up a scheme whereby some cuckoos were fitted with radio transmitters with solar panels on them and sending information of their movements to a satellite. One of those cuckoos now has travelled for 6 years with that equipment on it and has fed back an awful lot of information. But bear in mind that looking at these 2 young cuckoos here, they will be travelling on their own, not with adults, not with their own parents. And when they hatch from a dunnock's nest or a reed warbler's nest or a meadow pipit's nest, all the information they need to migrate is there. And just very quickly, because this has got nothing to do with Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory, but the exact movements here of quite a few cuckoos, red showing cuckoos that move in one particular direction out through Italy, across Europe through Italy, and come straight down, are now spending the winter in the Republic of the Congo. These yellow ones, yellow lines here, indicate other cuckoos that decide to go out on a westerly route and come around this way. The most effective route, and the one that's where cuckoos survive best of all, is this more easterly route here. So British cuckoos spend the winter in the Republic of the Congo. Some of them get down to Angola here, and they probably all get together and have a big Christmas party, which is really, really good. And just very quickly, after this one. One of the longest lived of all the cuckoos, a cuckoo called Chris, they always give them names, named after Chris Packham, was ringed in 2011, migrated 5 times, travelled 47,000 miles in that time, and during that time only spent 15% of his time in the UK, 38% en route, and 47% in the Congo. So there we are. We know an awful lot about cuckoos by radio tagging them now. And that information is passed on to ringers all around the world. And strangely, it might seem, in China, they ring birds. They also have cuckoos there. And it's interesting that all of their cuckoos spend the winter in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania. Nothing to do with Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory, but just a little bit more to show you the overall value of bird ringing. So in 1952, this rather nice building wasn't there. Well, it was as a ruin building, but we just had an independent ringer station then. In 62, we gained bird observatory status. It became a charitable trust, which we still are, in 84, and this field centre was built in 2002. That was really quite an undertaking. And you can actually see the building much better here from this aerial photograph. Not a particularly recent one, but it shows the building quite nicely. We have a purpose-built ringing room here over on the right, but in fact, the building was made up using 3 buildings, old buildings that ran like this. And they were in fact old army headquarters going back to the First World War. So to a greater or lesser extent, these 3 old listen hut type things are still in existence, and that's our field study centre. It costs us a lot of money to run this, which is why we're actively involved in fundraising in all sorts of ways to keep that up. But anyway, we've got lots of great volunteers. So that's after a very early start. It must have been very uncomfortable in those buildings at one time. We've actually got a heater and lights in our ringing room now. The lights would never have been thought of back in 1962. And here's an old photograph from the archives as well. A birding group on the beach in the early 1960s. Well, I mean, I know this isn't data that we need to collect, but isn't it interesting what bird watchers were wearing in the 1960s compared to all this comfortable, lightweight, ultra warm stuff that we wear now with walking boots and so on. But there we are. That was happening in the 1960s at Sandwich Bay. And now we've got a fairly modern building with a shop, a reception, a large room that enables us to set up displays, art shows, and so on. We have accommodation. All bird observatories have to provide accommodation. That's one of the prerogatives. That's one of the main. It's not prerogative. That's one of the main essentials for a bird observatory. Ours is fairly simple, not en suite, but we do have nice showers and toilets nearby. So if you want a cheap stay away from home, come and stay at the bird observatory. We do lectures there. This is our lecture room. And we particularly attract lots of young people these days. We have a WEX group, a Wildlife Explorers group, and a Phoenix group, all associated with the RSPB. And we also have schools coming in. We actually now also employ an education officer. So, Wildlife Explorers with my wife, learning a bit of botany. And there are all sorts of other interests as well. So I mentioned we're situated on a private estate, and to get onto that estate, you have to pay a toll. The toll now is £8. However, to reach Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory, if you tell the gate people you're coming to the observatory and you're going to park in our car park, they will only charge you £1, and we won't charge you to park. So that's not bad for a day's bird watching. We have, as I said, 3 major golf courses around us. They obviously do a lot of watering, cut their greens, and can do quite a bit of damage with chemicals also in the countryside, but equally they have huge amounts of lovely rough grassland to attract all sorts of breeding birds. But within that, we have our own nature reserves. This is Rest Harrow Dunes here in the background on the left. which is fabulous dune grassland, as I mentioned. And we also have this place called Rest Harrow Scrape, which I also mentioned, on a pretty wild day there. The word rest harrow comes from a plant, by the way, that grows either on chalk downland or on sandy soils, which gets its name because its root system is so woody. In the old days, when they had manual ploughs or horse-drawn ploughs, the woody roots would actually stop the plough. It would arrest the harrow, which is where the name has come from. So there we are. That's a view across our scrape. And I'm just going to say a couple more things about this before I stop for the break. We attract a lot of birds on there. That's our latest tide that you can see in the distance there. In winter, which we're coming up to now, we have a lot of duck species on there. We see little egrets. I'm gradually putting a few birds on here that we see on the scrape. Little egrets are numerous with us now. Teal are the most numerous wintering duck. We have counted over 400 teal on the scrape as the winter goes on, attractive little duck species. And during the autumn, when the water levels are quite low, we can see migrant waders like green sandpipers. This is a green shank here, wood sandpipers. A whole range of species are moving through. And I'll leave you with this one because in just only 1 year, we had avocets breeding on the scrape, but not since then, because alongside us, and something I haven't mentioned, is the RSPB have developed a huge area of grassland, which was taken up by 3 farms from the back of our building. You walk about half a mile, and then that runs up to an area called Worth. And you may have heard of the Liddon Valley RSPB Reserve. Not open to the public yet, although there is a public footpath through there. And they now have many pairs of avocets. And unfortunately, the RSPB have stolen ours as well. We don't see ours breeding any longer. However, we work very well with the RSPB. They don't have a building there. And we actually rent out half of our office at the observatory for the RSPB reserve warden. And she parks her vehicle and also pays for an area where she stores all her gear.
I did ask, what time of year would you recommend for a first visit?
Oh, right. Well, as far as migration is concerned, we are much busier in the autumn than we are in the spring. Our spring migration is very slow. Once birds have moved up as far as France into the continent, and then up a bit beyond that, they will come across our coastline and move to their breeding grounds very quickly. It's important for them to get back to their breeding grounds. So spring migration for us is quite quiet. However, having said that, we still see spring migrants, and during April and May and into June, we have a fantastic flora around Sandwich Bay, including many orchid species. Certainly one of them, possibly 2 of them, can only be seen in Kent, and a lot of other good flowers as well. And also our butterflies are good too. And generally bird watching is okay. Absolute best time is September and October to see the migrants and some really good scarce species. If that's okay. So we're on Rest Harrow Scrape, and this is some of the paraphernalia we have around the scrape, including on the right here. It's what's called a sound post, and if you visit the hides there, you can press the buttons on this post, and it will play you a variety of bird sounds of species that can be heard at that time of the year. We've set that up seasonally, and that's great for blind people. And we have seats for you to sit on, and everything's very comfortable. So a look around the reserve to see around our reserves and recording area to see how much more we can see. So here's the top of the beach, which is shingle at Sandwich Bay. The plant in flower here in June is sea kale. We're looking across to Ramsgate on the other side there. And these sandy beaches and shingle beaches are very unique habitats. And particularly for shingle and sand dunes. This plant, it's an eryngium. The English name is sea holly, very prickly plant. If you walk down the beach, you'll see sea holly all the way down. And in fact, halfway along our beach towards Pegworld Bay, nudists gather in the dunes there and swim. a fair way down. They're fine there. They're all very quiet down there. But I often wonder how comfortable they are in the dunes with this sea holly in flower and leaf along there. We have lots of lovely grassland. This area just across the road from the Bird Observatory is where we ring. We put our nets up in the trees and scrub to the right here, and some more trees and scrubs to the left. And our Heligoland trap is behind where I'm standing. But this is wonderful grassland, and we're looking across to the dunes there of the golf course, Royal St George's, and beyond that is the beach. Now, most days, certainly in late winter and into the spring when they start breeding, one of the birds we see regularly here is grey partridge. That's a scarce bird to see these days. I moved 7 years ago from West Kent, from Tunbridge, to East Kent, where I had much better access to the observatory. And this was a bird that I hardly saw back in West Kent. So fabulous to see grey partridges. I'm not saying there are huge numbers, but we see them extremely regularly. It's a really super bird to see. Again, on the beach, another one of our breeding birds there. Although they're in trouble on the beach, there's a lot of disturbance. Oyster catchers. I've put in a clutch of eggs here to show that birds that nest in this way do use camouflage as much as they can, and it should work as far as possible. When the tide goes out across Sandwich Bay and Pegwell Bay, we have mud flats and sand flats visited by a whole range of birds. This is a spring view of a gathering of whimbrels moving further north to perhaps breed up in Scotland, perhaps in Scandinavia, and masses of gulls still around on the other side of the bay. So all sorts of waders appear because we've got lots of water's edge and sea edge around Sandwich and Pegwell Bays. These are sanderlings. You'll know these, little bird that lives on the water's edge. We see these as winter visitors in quite large numbers. Towards the end of the Sandwich Bay Beach, you'll see it's pretty sandy here. There's an area that is managed for the National Trust by the Kent Wildlife Trust, and they're trying now to ease the pressure on the beach for breeding birds by controlling the number of dogs walking, which is sort of working quite well, but unfortunately it's not policed, and our wardens really don't have the time to do too much down there in that respect. And so there is still quite a bit of disturbance. Well, there's a long way along. It's actually a long walk here, and there are still birds that breed beyond that point. I've had a dog in the past, and dogs are lovely, but it's a matter of people and how they control their dogs and respect the countryside and so on that's around them. And of course, dogs love beaches and people love beaches, and this is a major issue for us these days. However, we have an organisation called Birdwise in East Kent, and they're doing their best to inform people. So on the right here is one of the largest of the houses on the Sandwich Bay estate. Pretty expensive place to live. The sailing club is alongside here. The observatory is just around the corner on the right here, and we're not far away. But this is some of our lovely dune grassland here. And in the spring, and then again in the autumn, we have wheatears moving through, along with other little migrants like whinchats. So September and October are good good times to see lots of these birds on the move. You've probably heard that there are a whole lot of short-eared owls in the country at the moment. We have 5 of them hunting around our recording area at the moment, really very close to the Bird Observatory. I'll certainly see a couple when I'm driving home tomorrow in the daylight. I should think it's going to be a dry day tomorrow. They have attempted to breed with us on a number of occasions, but we mostly see them as winter visitors. Nice daytime flying owl. In contrast, here on a really cold winter's day, the snow doesn't often lay on the beach, but this is a place where each winter we have varying numbers of snow buntings. Super little birds. We've ringed a number of these in the past on the beach here. And we've discovered that the snow buntings that we see in the winter aren't British snow buntings. They're not Icelandic snow buntings, but they're snow buntings from Scandinavia. They all have different markings, and we can recognise them in those respects. Also in winter, because on a lot of days in the during the winter season, the bay is quite sheltered from the wind. We can see a number of birds resting and roosting and feeding offshore. Birds like on the right, that's a winter plumage guillemot. We see razorbills too, sometimes puffins. And on the left, that's the winter plumage of a bird called a red-throated diver. We see all the diver species. We have common scoters, velvet scoters offshore as well as the winter moves on. Although red-throated divers look nowhere near as beautiful as they do in the summer in their breeding plumage, that's rather a striking plumage on the back there. I don't know whether you know, but the scientific name for the red-throated diver is Gaviar stellata. Stellata, referring to stars. And if you look at the back there, you can imagine those little white stars glistening on the back of the red-throated diver. So I mentioned plants, and I haven't put too many in here, but these are some of the species you can see through May and June. In April, the heath dog violets start to pop out. There are only 4 other sites in Kent where they grow. This is quite a scarce, nice pale little grassland plant. Southern marsh orchids flower or in all the dune slacks through our ringing area, right the way through the golf courses as well. We have a lovely little wetland plant called yellow bartsia, and also on the right here, the marsh helleborine. I think this is a plant that can only be found in Kent and Sussex in the UK, and that's a real great rarity for us, which you can see easily from the observatory. And probably the most famous orchid to be found around our area, and particularly around the golf courses, is the lizard orchid. Extremely scarce. In fact, it doesn't grow in many places in Britain, but it grows in abundance around us. We have mammal activity. We obviously have a lot of fat foxes, but we also see hares, which is really nice with all that lovely dune grassland, ideal habitat for hares. And in more recent times, water voles have been moving in. It's clear, clean water around us. Let's hope it remains that way. Sandwich isn't such a large town, but all of its resources are properly kept. And there's another village called Worth and Deal at the other end, where things seem to be working well from the point of view of water companies. But anyway, water voles as well. And of course, lots of butterflies, a lot of the common ones, which you can see here. But one on the top right there, the marble white, is a species of sand dunes and chalk downland particularly. And these are there are 3 species here, 2 of which have only moved in recent years, certainly in any numbers. On the right-hand side, the 2 butterflies there are wall browns. They're increasing really nicely on our short grassland. Ringlets also have been increasing, and it's only back in 2020 that our first small blue was recorded, and we do now have a colony of those on the food plant, the kidney vetch, which is around us, which is really nice. My wife, by the way, from the plant point of view, is Vice County Recorder for botany here in East Kent, so she looks after that. We have the County Recorder for moths, who is at the observatory. I'll be ringing with him in the morning. And we've now recorded over 1,200 species of moths at Sandwich Bay, which is a pretty high, it's a very, very high tally. And as far as Odonata are concerned, the dragonflies and damselflies, we've now recorded the most species anywhere in the UK. So we've got some really good wetlands around the reserve. We have species like the southern migrant hawker. Lots of other new species for Britain have been arriving. The rarest of which is this lovely little damselfly, the dainty damselfly, the UK's rarest Odonata. And we've recorded at least 180 individuals it's not a private site now, but it's a site where we've now bought bought the land. And I'm afraid I'm not afraid, but we take the opportunity when visitors come to see the dainty damselfly. Our warden will gladly take them around in a group for a fee of £5. So why not? People are very pleased to see this great rarity that we've paid. We've actually bought the land to look after it. So back on our scrape here, one of the species we see regularly on the scrape all year round is little grebe. And here's some nice facts for you. 193 bird species have been recorded on Rest Harrow Scrape over all of our recording time since the 1950s. And I think it's just one over now, 346, I think it is, bird species in total have been recorded in the observatory's recording area. So on the scrape in the winter, currently we have a number of duck species, but particularly teal and gadwall. Gadwall are doing really well with us at the moment, I think elsewhere on freshwater lakes and pools around the country, and shovelers as well. So they're always around now. Our snipe numbers are building up. People do like to see snipe. I think this year we've already got up to 40 snipe around the scrape, a distant view, and you can get really close views of snipe from our hides during the winter. The Heligoland trap is set on what used to be an old canal, really, that was dug and built to serve Sandwich, to get boats in, to get barges in, but that never worked really well and it silted up. And now we've got quite a large area of this, and we own the land on either side of this old canal, and it's scrubbing up, and there's plenty of water in it now in the winter with all the rainfall we've had. And that, as I mentioned before, you saw the water rail earlier on, it's a good place for that. And the scrub is just terrific for things like firecrests and goldcrests at this time of the year. Back in the 1950s, the bird watchers and ringers then actually planted a small area of woodland. I mean, it's not old woodland. However, there are trees there, and those trees do provide shelter. And there are a whole number of tree species there, including Scots pine, which you can see in the top right. We have about 30 or 40 nest boxes up in there, which is useful. Sparrowhawks nest every year. Long-eared owls sometimes breed there. And we see all sorts of woodland birds, including regularly every year. We have a bit of an influx of crossbills in the pines there until they finish off the pine cones. They then move off. That's a male that I put in on the right there. We have breeding goldcrests, although again at this time of year there'll be several goldcrests and firecrests in the area of woodland that we call the elms, and we have breeding blackcaps there, common breeding for Britain anyway. So this is our Rest Harrow Dunes reserve, great place for plants and insects particularly. And here over our nice grassland, dune grassland, I mentioned short-eared owls, which are now regular winter visitors. We have usually 2 pairs of barn owls breeding close to the observatory. I hold the Schedule 1 license to monitor them and to ring them. We have nest boxes up where the barn owls breed regularly. So it's one of the rather nice jobs of the year, going round nest boxes. We work with all sorts of other organisations here in East Kent. And in fact, I work with a couple of other colleagues outside of the observatory to ring 90 or to monitor 90 barn owl boxes along the River Stour, which runs inland from Pegwell Bay to Ashford. So that's always a nice time of year. We have breeding little owls. Because of our dune, we haven't got many trees. So our little owls don't breed in trees. We don't have old enough trees for little owls, but they nest in rabbit burrows, which is really quite common for them, and sometimes in old buildings like this one. Sometimes they're old scrappy trees that they might eventually get into. So little owls are around all the time. Now, I've mentioned our reserves. Now, it's all very well buying this land and monitoring it, but it has to be maintained. As we have volunteer ringers, as we have volunteers coming in to make tea, as we have volunteers coming in to look after our children's groups and so on, we're very lucky. We have a volunteer conservation team. and they come in. This is Bill, who runs the squad. They come in twice a week to maintain all of our land, including the fencing, the strimming, which is happening here, cutting the grass. This allows the area you're looking at on the right there is a hollow, is an old dune slat, which is where our rarest orchids grow. This is where the marsh hellebrins are. So there's always work to do. I really admire those guys. So apart from the areas that we own, there are some other good areas to watch birds. One is around the golf courses, and all of these big areas here of rough grassland. We have excellent populations of skylarks. Here I'm putting some birds onto the screen each time here. And meadow pipits are regular breeding birds as well. And the meadow pipits bring in a couple of pairs of cuckoo. Oh, not pairs, sorry, a couple of territories of female cuckoos every year. The golf courses are always short of water, but there is a lot of water under the dunes, particularly in the slacks. And they do bring this up. They do have a license to bring the water up. I think they're pretty heavily controlled. But these seasonal water bodies, even though they might be quite small like this one, can be useful for a whole range of wildlife. For instance, you're always going to see migrating common sandpipers and green sandpipers in areas like this. We have flocks of linnets and goldfinches around. They'll certainly come down and drink at the pools. And southern migrant hawker here, like many of the other dragonflies and damselflies that we see, are also around on the golf courses, which is rather good. The following slides look out over the new RSPB Lyddon Valley Reserve. I say new, but the first land was purchased about 7 or 8 years ago by the RSPB, and the idea was to flood it, to dig scrapes. And with the heavy rainfall that we've had this year and last year, the whole area has been brilliant. It's flooded perfectly for the RSPB. The warden is absolutely over the moon. But anyway, some of the birds that we can see, keeping very up to date. Recent arrivals have been a flock of 80 white-fronted geese. With those 80 white-fronted geese, there were about 4 tundra bean geese. They're all over the reserve at the moment. This is an area that you can walk to from the observatory. There's a bean goose. Yeah, we have a few of those around this year. We've had the most Buick swans this year than we've ever had. I think there are about 5 of them in with a flock of mute swans. We had 2 hooper swans stopped off as well, but not for very long. But the farm here is growing super grasses here for the swans to feed on. You see, I keep showing you areas of flooding like this. This is all, we can walk to all of this. This is all from public footpaths from the observatory, which runs through to a village called Worth and eventually through to Deal. We've got big flocks of widgeon at the moment, of course, down there. Lapwings breed, and in fact, one of the target species for the reserve was to bring lapwings back to breed along with redshanks, and that's all happening. But of course, it's increasing the winter population at the moment. Avocets have been breeding. I think they're now up to, I don't know, 20 pairs or more of avocets on the reserve. 2 of them were ours, but never mind. We'll try and get those back at some time or another. And along with the avocets, for the first time back in the summer, 4 pairs of black-winged stilts, of which 1 raised young successfully. This is an incredible reserve. The problem is that the RSPB have, the problem is access. The only access currently is from a small village called Worth. And the people of Worth and the local authorities will not give the RSPB access just yet. They were hoping to have bought up a farm, another farm, a 4th farm, that will give them access to the main road that runs from Deal to Sandwich. But they haven't managed to get that yet. But when they can, this will be a terrific reserve to visit, although you can walk around the footpaths. So all sorts of wetland birds there, masses of song in the spring from sedge warblers, reed warblers, reed buntings, Chess's warblers, are all there as you'd expect. We've recorded good raptors, a good number of raptors around our site. Kestrels are very, very plentiful. We've got a couple of nest boxes up. This is a very old one that they've used in most years. They're pretty successful, our local pair. Of course, in East Kent, we now see large numbers of breeding buzzards. They've moved back right the way through Britain now. There are fields all around here where they can find rabbits and voles in good numbers, but this photograph shows more flooding on the Worth marshes. In the summer of 2022, we had a really good bird species that visited us, a bird called an Eleanorus falcon. That's not it. That's another bird that turned up alongside it, and that's a bird called a red-footed falcon. There's the Eleanorus falcon, a new species for Kent, hardly any records for Britain. This bird would normally be breeding on islands around the Mediterranean and the west coast of Africa, out along the west coast of Africa. So two really good birds at one time, and on I think the second day after they'd been seen for the first time, 1,000 people turned up. One of the biggest twitches we've seen in our area. Vicky, the warden, the RSPB warden, had only just started the day before. She phoned Stefan and said, "What am I going to do? They're coming into the village. Where are they going to park?" So Stefan said, "Well, you'll have to open up one of your fields and get them in," which they did. And both of those birds stayed at least 2 weeks with us. We're used to seeing birds like hobbies, which I've popped in at the top there, but these two were rather special for 2022. And we get all sorts of passage migration of raptors. We do have red kites breeding in East Kent, but a fair way from us. Most of the red kites we see are passage migrants, and a lot of them, many of them, are young birds like these, which move through at different times during the year. We now record white-tailed eagle on a regular basis. They come up along the south coast from the Isle of Wight and visit us and then go back again. And we see birds like honey buzzards migrating on a regular basis. Probably the best place to watch raptors at Sandwich Bay is to stand in our car park, which is what these guys are doing. It's pretty flat land around us, so you can imagine we have a huge skyscape. As you know, Turner painted in Margate, which isn't far away from us, with all his fabulous skies. Well, they're great places to watch birds. I'm at the bottom of the downs here in Kingsdown, but we still get a lot of the really good birds from Worth marshes coming across here. I was flabbergasted the other morning. We were having our breakfast in our conservatory. Nice glass roof, very useful to have a glass roof. And the glossy ibis flew over. It had just spent the day on Worth marshes. So there are some very good birds to see. We are really getting very well known now in southeast England, and as such we have two new patrons for the observatory. One is David Lindo, the urban birder, who comes from your neck of the woods and is very famous, and another guy called Simon Barnes, the journalist and an author. Well, the first thing I did when certainly when David Lindo came along, I met him and I booked him immediately to give us a talk, and we were able to raise £1,200 back in the autumn when he came along. So if you know Simon Barnes, he's going to be receiving a call from me soon as well to get him along. But whoever you might be, however famous you might be, as far as we're concerned at the observatory, we're getting on, a lot of us, unfortunately. The people who've got time to, we're all volunteers. And I spend several days a week down there. But we still need people for the future. And with our WEX groups and our Phoenix groups, then I think we've got quite a lot of budding young bird watchers to come. So thank you very much for listening. That's Sandwich Bay Bird Observatory. Don't forget, you can visit us for the day. you can come down and stay with us for a night or two in our cheap but very comfortable accommodation.